It was supposed to be a short 8-month war. Before the Terran Ampharox War, humanity was under a governing body called the Terran Republic, which maintained a strict policy on neutrality aside from the usual trade agreements. However, that ended when the Terran Republic found itself plunged in a bloody civil war. Reasons for the war varied from source to source, resulting in no concrete answers for the war. The Terran Republic split into two factions. Loyalist forces called themselves the Republic of United Systems, and those who initiated the conflict, the Dominion. The Civil War was widely broadcasted throughout galactic space, as stunned onlookers could only see the sheer brutality humanity committed upon themselves. Those who initially viewed humanity as a peaceful, caring race had those illusions completely shattered. Taking advantage of the human Civil War, plans were immediately, almost as soon as the human Civil War started, were drawn up to invade humanity with the goal of annexation and the subjugation of the Terran race. However, the sheer brutality of the Civil War made some of our military thinkers nervous. Reports of genocide, destructions of cities, the complete mistreatment of POWs, and the overall lack of care of civilians. They brought up concerns that if the humans were willing to go to such lengths of brutality and violence against their own species, what would happen if they were given a common enemy? Of course, those who brought out the concerns were ignored, with a counter-argument that humanity wouldn't have the resources to wage another war against a superior force immediately once their civil war ended. The human civil war lasted for 9 years. As the brutality of the war escalated, however, the war ended as both sides called for a ceasefire after the devastation that encompassed human space. Of course, humanity being a part of the Galactic Federation, organizations flooded into human space to help ease the suffering of humanity, to which humanity was grateful. Once the treaties were signed, and as both sides were gradually demobilizing their forces, that's when we took the opportunity to launch our decisive offensive into human space. As expected, the Federation demanded our withdrawal from human space, which prompted our response: withdrawal of the Federation. As planned, the Federation and its members condemned the invasion. However, no real military action was taken, due to the Federation knowing how outmatched their military is dwarfed in comparison to the might of our military. As a result, almost, if not all, Federation support to humanity was recalled, out of fear that a retaliatory strike would occur for raiding the Terrans, resulting in humanity fighting alone. The general overall plan called on a swift thrust to the human capital world of Earth, as we thought. Capturing humanity's homeworld would force them to capitulate. Luckily for humanity, Earth and the Sol system was the farthest system from our borders, which whilst we thought was the only thing we thought the humans had going for them. From us to Earth, we had to go through 7 systems with 9 human-inhabited planets. Given our military capabilities and how fractured humanity was, the war was expected to end in a mere 8 months. Just how wrong we were. Resistance was, as expected, half-hearted at best. We initially invaded through Dominion space, in which we swiftly took the first 2 systems with relative ease and with minimal casualties within a span of 1 month. However, resistance movements started to form on occupied planets, which raised some concerns with the military high command, especially those who had experience in guerrilla warfare, although those concerns fell on deaf ears. Although ambushes of convoys and patrols on occupied planets started to rise, one concerning report was one of our military signal companies was ambushed, resulting in everyone killed. The report of the ambush was written off, however. It was noted that a single Dominion ship was spotted leaving the planet. Local forces were unable to shoot down the ship, resulting in the ship escaping the planet and jumping out of the system. Moving on with the plan, we jumped to the 3rd system, following our battle plan of striking towards Earth. However, we noticed that Dominion forces had rallied to put up a fierce resistance against our invading fleet. When the invading fleet jumped into the system, Dominion ships were in a defensive position, overwatching the planet, as we noticed an endless stream of ships leaving the planet and jumping out of the system, behind the Dominion fleet. The fleet admiral in command at the time assumed that the retreating ships were military targets, as shown in the recent human civil war. Little regard was shown to civilians. Our fleet moved forward and completely obliterated the Dominion navy present, which was a fleet comprised of only frigates and destroyers. However, it was noted that among the Dominion fleet there was a Republic cruiser among the Dominion fleet, which raised the question: why was a Republic cruiser among the Dominion fleet if they hated each other? Yet again, the question was never truly asked, and was more of an afterthought following the destruction of the Dominion fleet, but it was noted that the fleet fought to the bitter end. Nothing noteworthy was said about the 3rd system invasion. It went smoothly as planned, swiftly taking the planet. Although Dominion resistance on the planet was notably fiercer, it was nothing that our forces couldn't handle. After the conquest of the system, we thought humanity would call for peace, considering their economic and military capabilities being strained due to the Civil War. However, humanity, as stubborn as they always were, instead of calling for peace, reeled up for a fight. As for the ships attempting to leave the system, instead of trying to hail the fleeing ships, the Admiral, grief-stricken as his son was killed on the planet below, ordered for the complete destruction, rather than attempting to take them all captive, under the assumption that they were military assets trying to flee. It was later found out that the destruction of the fleeing ships had mainly civilians aboard. When we found out that we just killed fleeing civilians, we thought nothing of it. Civilians were always caught in the crossfire in war. Taking note from the human Civil War, who cares about civilians? Humanity did, and they took it personally. For 20 ships, they were mostly destroyed. As well, once humanity understood our intent of subjugating their race, a unified cry came from humanity. A cry for vengeance, retribution, thirst for revenge. Once humanity found out this was a war for their species, an unwavering resolve emerged. Humanity was in this till the end. This new revelation terrified the Galactic Federation and caused us in the military high command to nervously glance at each other. For we committed an action that terrified those few military thinkers planning the invasion of humanity. We gave them a common enemy to rally against. From what a human would say, you kicked the hornet's nest. As all over human space, a flurry of activity transformed a half-hearted, shattered people of both the Republic and the Dominion into one unified fighting force, with the sole purpose of driving the invaders out of their homes. Never seen before in galactic history, humanity transitioned to a pure total war society, despite massive loss of life and the human Civil War. Military recruitment numbers were increasing, reaching an all-time high. Almost overnight, resistance on occupied worlds expanded hundredfold, forcing us to halt our advance in human space to put down the resistance movements. It took us at least 6 months to put down the major resistance movements on the occupied planets. The thing with these guerrillas is that you put down one set of fighters, at least 2 more take their place. Despite this, the occupying garrisons committed harsh reprisals on the occupied humans, which further agitated them, leading more to join resistance cells. It was clear that the war won't be over within 8 months. Our leaders refused to withdraw from human space, marking their intent on continuing the war by all means. When we eventually stabilized to the point where we initiated our invasion of the 4th human-held system, instead of a shattered Dominion military, we faced a new enemy. During the 6 months of us dealing with resistance fighters, humanity reconsolidated their forces, completely overhauling and reorganizing their forces under one banner. The enemy we faced called themselves the United Terran Empire, where they waged war like an animal pushed into a corner. We were able to gain complete space supremacy, as humanity's doctrine of space warfare mainly consisted of fast hit-and-run ships rather than open battles. However, the planet invasion was a different story. It was the bloodiest battle we have ever seen in our military history so far. Our forces landed in pre-sighted kill zones all over the planet. Every major road had at least one artillery battery pre-sighted on it. Destroyed cities from the previous war made perfect fortresses, and the overall zealous nature of human foot soldiers to fight to the bitter end. It took our forces at least 5 months of repeated invasion attempts for us to finally establish a foothold on the planet. It was also here humanity revealed its trump card. During the human Civil War, they tinkered with the technology to force ships that jumped into the system unable to jump out, effectively forcing the attacker to attack the planet to destroy the FTL prohibitor. With humanity revealing their trump card, it effectively forced us to jump into each system and capture the planet that had these FTL prohibitors, forbidding us from utilizing our superior numbers and overwhelming multiple systems at one time. A year has passed in the 4th system campaign of feeding more soldiers and material onto the planet when humanity did the complete unthinkable. Humanity located our species' homeworld and firebombed it. Never before in our history that an enemy force attacked our homeworld, let alone get close enough. The fact that humanity managed to sneak past numerous fleet patrols and perfect timing while the home fleet was away infuriated our leaders. The Admiral of the home fleet was used as a scapegoat and executed for his failure to protect the planet, as well as reinforcing the home fleet with more warships to defend the planet, led humanity attempting the same thing twice. The months following humanity's daring raid were the worst months I ever lived through. Morale both at home and at the front dropped, while humanity and also the Federation were ecstatic of the raid. Humanity reminiscing on the Doolittle raid that happened so long ago in their history. This resulted in some Federation members giving material aid to humanity, and for the humans fighting in the 4th campaign, their resistance grew even more. It was concerning the lack of prisoners being taken during the fighting. Human soldiers would rather die fighting rather than surrender. This resulted in encircled human forces fighting to the bitter end, often doing suicidal counterattacks, attempting to break out. However, the series of setbacks continued. Following the raid on the homeworld, humanity started raiding our other planets as well as raiding our mercantile and supply ships. Human ships jump into the system to carry out their raid, then jumping out of the system right before our defense fleets arrived. These raiding attacks, although insignificant at first, started to impact the morale and stability of our empire, as well as affect our ability to wage war, which prompted us to launch massive propaganda campaigns in an effort to save face and maintain support for the war. As a result, our leaders stretched out our naval assets throughout our empire to safeguard planets, ships that were desperately needed on the front lines or escorting supply and reinforcements bound for the human front. Even so, some daring human fleets still attempted their raids. The 4th system campaign took 4 years to fully capture the planet, with our forces manually clearing out each tunnel, sewer, mountain system, individual to fully clear out any resistance. Even more so, out of all the defenders on the planet, less than 5% were captured, a grim prospect for future campaigns. Despite this, our leaders urged our people on, although while weary of the war, they still supported it. The 5th and 6th system campaigns were just as bloody as the 4th campaign, except even more violent and brutal. When the 5th campaign commenced, humanity made no effort in evacuating civilians as it did in the 4th campaign, which meant everyone on the planet was designated as a hostile combatant, furthering humanity's resolve to fight. Whatever new weapon or tactic we deployed, humanity gracefully adapted to it. In the 5th campaign, our forces started with a planet saturation bombardment, with decent effect, although humanity adapted by digging into the ground, creating massive and elaborate underground bunkers, as well as digging into the mountains. This was further cemented in the 6th campaign, where our saturation bombardment produced little to no effect on human forces on the planet, as they were all underground, forcing the units on the ground to clear out the planet, one hole at a time. The 7th and final campaign was the last campaign of the war. Oddly enough, this was the campaign where humanity was at its finest. So many events happened at the same time, during and after the campaign. Initially, humanity was giving us a massive misinformation campaign in which, rather than defend the 7th and last system from Earth, they would fall back and defend Earth with everything they have, and only a skeleton garrison on the planet to monitor the arrival of our fleet. Of course, no one in the military brought the idea, until the surveillance footage of massive transport ships and warships jumping in the direction of Earth. What we didn't know at the time was that this was humanity baiting us into a trap, and we bought it. We couldn't really adapt to humanity's weapon of anti-FTL, so we just jumped into the system with a heavy escort of warships consisting of frigates to full-on dreadnoughts. However, this system was different. When the forces initially jumped, there was an uncharacteristic amount of space debris in the system, consisting of trash to destroyed warships. Something was off, but no one could explain why. Despite the eeriness of the situation, the fleet pressed onwards in a tight formation to maintain fleet cohesion, as well as for protection, but this was exactly what humanity had wanted. Out of nowhere, orbital defense platforms consisting of various sizes, as well as a significant portion of the human navy, opened up on the fleet, due to our fleet being herded. The fleet took heavy casualties. Countless war and transport ships were destroyed, pushing forward towards Earth. Despite heavy losses, more reinforcing warships were transported to the system to aid in the battle. When all of the orbital defense platforms were destroyed, and the human navy withdrawing, the battle-worn fleet started to advance towards the planet, knowing full well that they couldn't flee if they tried. The first wave landed seemingly unopposed. Our soldiers spread out to complete their objectives, and established a foothold on the planet as well. However, all hell broke loose when the second wave was landing. All at once, human guns started to open up on our beleaguered units. Our forces had been led into another kill zone. Almost overnight, the entirety of the first and second waves were wiped out. The complete annihilation of our forces on the planet was the breaking point for both the military and our empire. Huge swaths of our military mutinied, refusing to go, as well as extreme civil unrest at home, as well as reports of Federation warships invading our systems. Our leaders were forced to make peace. Apparently, human diplomats throughout the war have been meeting frequently with Federation members, garnering their support for assistance. Initially, they hesitated and refused. However, one by one, Federation members agreed to the call to arms once they saw that we, the mighty Orcs Empire, could be beaten. Humanity knew it wouldn't win a fight on its own, not without the support of the Federation. So as a result, humanity reeled back and made the hard-hearted, grim decision to trade bodies for time. If a squad of humans could hold back an entire platoon, a platoon holding back a company holding back a battalion could buy time. How much time would a planet buy? Sacrificing 7 star systems, 9 planets bought humanity 15 years. Humanity was the one who made the demands of the peace negotiations, in which they demanded unconditional surrender. And in their position, having the full support of the Federation, as well as millions of human soldiers still eager to fight, they dug their heels. In the end, we were forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty, in which we were forced to release all of our enslaved races, as well as pay compensation to them, on top of giving humanity war reparations. It was later discovered that humanity was acting only out of restraint, out of respect for the Federation demands, of if the Ampharox Empire's calls for peace, humanity would accept. In reality, humanity wanted to destroy, bomb, completely eradicate our species off the face of the galaxy. And decades past the conclusion of the war, a large majority of humans still harbours those feelings. It was also found out that the reason why humanity was so efficient at raiding our supply convoys and planets was that they cracked our military cipher. At the start of the war, human resistance fighters ambushed a signal convoy, killing everyone and taking anything valuable, managing to smuggle the cipher off-world. A simple report that was shrugged aside at the start of the war costed us dearly. It forced us to divert countless warships to worlds that held no strategic significance, increasing the number of escorts for supply convoys, drastically showing the convoy down to keep them sufficiently protected, and showing the galactic community that we could be beaten. The extreme loss of life due to the war is still hotly debated and counted to this day. Both sides suffered horrendous losses, but it was humanity that took the brunt of the fighting. In comparison, our military and civilian deaths only amounted to 10% of our population. The human losses, however, dwarfed our dead count 5-fold. Humanity lost 40 to 50% of their entire population, as well as the near destruction of 9 planets. Luckily for humanity, the races that were freed by them flocked to their planets. Almost out of gratitude to their liberators, humanity started to rebuild. After the war, I managed to meet a human general, and I asked, "Why? Why fight as hard as you did? For what reason?" And his response shook me to my very core. We humans are not so different from you and me. We hate each other as much as we hate you. It's in our blood to hate our fellow man, but despite that, there has always been one truly unifying force in our history, one call that would always unite us: the emergence of a common enemy. And so, I write this memoir as a warning against those who wish malice against humanity. Matriarch Zealous Axelon, Joint Chief of Staff of the Ampharoxian Military High Command.